So we do have an agenda.
Mhm.
James, do you want to kick off the agenda? You want me to do it? How do you want to do this?
Yeah, I can start and kind of get the ball rolling, and then please come over the top, Steve, at any point if I'm missing something. But appreciate everybody joining. I know we'll still probably have a couple come in as they find time. So we'll go ahead and roll since after 4. The agenda's been set out. The initial or starting point was going to be to review the final report template. Really, as we kind of look through the rest of the year as we approach the election and kind of doing a report close thereafter, we really need to start kind of focusing in on what we want to get out of that reporting period. So we think using the final report as a guide to kind of as a framework to provide sort of a path in the road to get there is probably an efficient way to start thinking about things as opposed to just talking about random topics. It's a good way for us to kind of weave those topics together. And so we thought during this meeting, we'd throw up the current status of that final report template. It'll change over time, but I want to make sure everyone's aware of what's in there. And then really in the next couple weeks, we should probably start tweaking that to match the topics we've talked about and those couple more that we want to hit for the rest of the year. And so I'm going to attempt, I know people have probably taken a view at that on the Google Drive, but I'm going to attempt to go ahead and share my screen. Um, and there we go. And can everybody see the final report?
Yep, I can see it.
Looks good.
Great. Then I have passed task 1 in Zoom. So very short template, as you can see, and if you've played around with Google Drive, not a ton in there. So it's designed so every committee can kind of cater it to what they want to focus on. But the basic layout is to really summarize the meetings that we've had throughout the year, and then slowly as you get towards the body of the report, focus on the specific takeaways and or recommendations that we want to provide back to the committee from our specific focus area. And so that kind of middle paragraph is really about the survey that we've all, I think, put in some questions to. We'll put the feedback from the survey there, which gives us, a little bit of a framework. And then we'll start getting down into the specific topics that we've discussed in each of our engagements over the year. And then once we come out of the discussion on our topics, we focus on kind of what we learned from those discussions, which is within our committee of cybersecurity, voter list maintenance. What are our takeaways on how North Carolina State Board of Elections does business? So really encapsulate what the current state of play is, and then kind of what we learned in looking at that current state of play. And then we follow that up sort of in the last section of, based on what we learned, what are some potential recommendations that we would make going forward? Those recommendations could be some of these things don't need to change. They're done really well. They match other best practices, but we may find some things as we go along that absolutely probably need to be looked into, either further area studies or come back with some very specific recommendations. And we'll use that there in that next to last portion. And then at the very end, we'll come up with a list of resources, basically our bibliography of what we use to get us to this point, as well as potentially further areas of study that we may not be able to get to in this first year. So not a very complicated template, but probably thorough enough based on the short time frame we have to look into our topic. And so I will pause there and let either Steve or Jennifer come over the top if I mischaracterized anything or missed any key points, please.
No, I think you did a good job. We did make this a really basic, final report template. I think the key is going to be the topics. That middle part. What did you actually study? What seems to, confuse people in North Carolina, or what do they really want to know? What's going to help restore trust? And then, in the findings, what did you learn? Are there things to improve on? So that's really, the bulk of what we're doing. A quick question. Did we introduce Scott at our last meeting? Have you all met Scott from the Carter Center?
I don't
think
believe
so.
we've met, Scott. No.
Okay, Scott, introduce yourself. I've forgotten what committees you've been in. Yep.
I'm Scott Konopasek. As you can see, I'm in my main office, which is my workshop. I make furniture now that I'm retired. I'm a retired election official. I've been working with the Carter Center for about 9 months on election observation and election issues. I was an election official for almost 30 years in 4 different states. So I have a pretty big perspective on what common practices are on different things. So I'm a resource to you to bounce ideas off of, or to get a sense of where North Carolina fits into every place else. So feel free to ask me any questions. Otherwise, I'm just here as a fly on the wall, just available for in any way that I can help you guys.
Excellent. Nice to meet you, Scott.
Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
Okay, so with that, I'll kind of throw it back out to the group to see if there's any comments, questions, things maybe we should add in the template, or focus it on. I'll just kind of leave it up to you guys for any questions or follow-up.
So we do have an item a little bit later on the agenda. 2 more later, I think, about some specific topics that could go in that. What specific topics did your committee study?
Okay.
And so I think that's a key thing, as well as the resource list at the end. And we can discuss that more. But I think in general, the form seems like it's designed to be as generic as possible to give us flexibility to do what we need to do. I haven't heard anything back on the polling questions or any of that. I don't know what the progress on that is. We could
Those,
check and find out.
yeah, no, we submitted all the questions from the various committees. There are 4 different universities that put polls into the field in March and April. We will probably get results back in April, but there's also a survey on the website. I think it's up. And although, unless we drive people to the website, that's not going to really do a lot. So the only other thing that the committee needs to think about is, is the polling that's done by Meredith and Elon and all that, is that sufficient for you all to get public input, or is there more that you would like to do, whether it's a virtual town hall or a survey to send through, another organization? That's just something that you all should decide as well.
And how does this fit in with your tour, Jennifer? I mean, is that a way to gather some public comments, or do you want to keep that separate?
Absolutely. The tour will be gathering comments as well. It's a good point. We've got one on April the 30th and one on May the 7th. What we're going to do is try to get everyone to fill out the survey right after they come to the town hall. And the survey that we use has questions like, what was your trust level before you had this town hall? What's your trust level now? What specifically did you find helpful that was answered? It's a little generic, with 11 different issue areas. The survey at the end, people won't take more than 5 minutes, but it does give them a chance to say what in particular they're worried about. We did find in 2022 that people are very worried about cybersecurity. They don't understand it. They hear a lot about it. And like we mentioned at the beginning, everybody's, talking AI now and deep fakes and all that. So we do think that this particular committee could do a lot in terms of public awareness.
Great.
So we'll gather that public input as well. And the tours, there's one April, one May. There'll be many in August and September, and we will, even though the draft will have been submitted by July, we will incorporate many of those, and the steering committee will continue to meet with committee chairs in the fall as we polish and finalize that report.
Great. Thanks for that, Jennifer. Okay, so I think we're good on discussing the report template. I'm going to transition to topic 2, which is really sort of a review and or open discussion on, sort of gave everyone a reading day. When Vice having our last, there were a lot of scheduled conflicts. We had a big committee meeting like the week prior, which a lot of people attended. So we thought it might be a good opportunity to give people some time to kind of do their own research. And so we kind of left topic 2 today open as sort of a discussion opportunity on anything that people may have dug into for that time off, and or to discuss things they may have seen during the last open committee meeting. Really was Paul Cox led a discussion on legal issues and opportunities for North Carolina elections, things that he's seen. I know some people in our group had some keen insights on some topics that he brought forward. And so we thought we'd bring it back as an open discussion today, since we haven't really had a time as a group to talk about Paul's discussion. So I will kind of leave that. Steve, I don't know if you want to add anything on, but kind of let that percolate, see if anybody want to comment on some of the legal insights that Paul had.
Right. I'll say that I did start digging into some of the North Carolina code after that, and saw some of the things he was talking about. He didn't talk about the cybersecurity issues and that sort of thing. I found those in the code and sort of went down a little rabbit hole following all of that. And so I'm going to talk about that later in this meeting. But he talked a lot about changes in everything from, the new voter ID laws to a lot of other things. And I think there was a court decision since then, actually, just in the months since then, that actually maybe invalidated some of that. Does anybody know? Anybody remember what that could have been?
The court case, and of course it could be appealed, but it referred to 749, which was the one that changed the composition of boards of elections from 5
Right.
to 8. That one was declared an unconstitutional taking of gubernatorial power or something. I can't remember the exact legal explanation, but again, it could be appealed. So for now, the boards of elections are not changing. But other issues, and of course, voter ID still has some, lawsuits out there, but the observers and the counting of votes and that kind of thing, those are all in place and in force.
Okay. So I don't know what other people found. I'll leave it open for anybody who wants to add their observations.
This is Ted. I took the time to try to spend it in the Google Drive and the resources folder that Stephen, you put together, and some others had contributed to. I spent a lot of time on the verified voting page. Steve, I think you put that in there with a description, and particularly the risk limiting audit versus the post-election audit that we seem to use here in North Carolina. So that's where I spent my time. I'm happy to share what limited I know beyond what verified voting and some other sources helped me understand. But I guess I can add, verified voting was a resource that I used for the other committee that I'm sitting on as well, where we're looking at accessibility issues. And so it was a way for me to understand the actual equipment that is at the polling place, and how that may be different depending on what a voter's needs are.
Excellent.
Man, that's good insights. I'm a newly minted election official, and I've worked all of 2 elections. One, I did early voting for the midterms in 22. That was exciting. And then I did a small municipal here in my hometown of Apex, which was, we elected 3 town commissioners and the mayor ran unopposed. So a very small, very tiny but that was an election day. And as you said, since 22, we've upgraded our equipment for people who have different access needs. And so it's amazing how much can change in just one election cycle.
And I guess I'll add to that, James, that what was interest to this committee is that paper ballots are generated from the devices that we use. However, that many of the more accessible devices that folks with disabilities, or frankly, as I understand it, even folks who don't necessarily have disabilities but would like access to in order to ease voting, there are increasing levels of automation isn't the right word, but of electrical connection, if not network connection, in some of those more accessible machines. So everything from ways to magnify and enhance to, on the very far right edge of that, actually help somebody who is not able to interact with a screen or a pencil record their vote. So probably a small margin of voters, but those are the places that I guess somebody who is skeptical of network security and doesn't understand what is actually plugged in and what is not, so to speak, might be suspicious of and choose as a focus for undermining how secure the election actually is.
No, that's a great catch. And I've had that exact conversation with voters during the election on what is that cable? It's obviously an internet cable. You're connected to the internet, and it was the power cable. But you're absolutely right. Anything that someone can misinterpret can, whittle down their confidence in the equipment.
Yeah, and I'm going to actually mention that issue, the network connectivity, later, because when I was going through the law, that's actually since 2017, the North Carolina law says that no voting equipment can be connected to any external network or communication system. Now, I hope everybody's doing that correctly. Some of the devices do have network hardware in them, but they're supposed to be like disabled prior to the election going active. But I'll talk more about that later because people do worry.
Quick anecdote, we actually at one of our town halls had a county information officer who said that he wanted to confirm for himself there were no modems, even though some machines had a place for a modem. And so he had his election workers open the machine up, which of course,
Ooh.
the machine, they had to send it back to Raleigh to get recertified. But he said he could see with his own eyes there was indeed no modem. Good to know it's the law too.
Yeah.
Maybe too, that's the gray edge of what our committee is responsible for. A lot of these perception issues are not technical specifications or equipment minutia, but rather not just general public education, but also poll worker education and the way that a polling place is set up. I sat through an accessibility meeting today, and they talked about the most important aspect of making a space accessible is having educated and friendly poll workers, and that carries a lot of weight. And so just imagining what a polling place would look like, where you have some stations that have cords running out of them, those are the places that an unaware voter or a voter who does not leverage those resources would see. And so that's maybe a presentation or a voting place education or labeling opportunity to avoid those sorts of concerns as somebody walks into the polling place, especially with the observers being more and more prevalent.
Anybody else have anything they learned or interesting observations from the time off last month?
Okay, great. We'll not belabor that. We sort of talk around this topic every time, so I'm sure we'll come back to it. But we'll go ahead and move to topic 3. And this is really where we started generating ideas for potential future topics that we could focus on in the group as we kind of close out the next few months. And Steve, I'll kind of have you jump in here, as you did a great job of kind of consolidating these and kind of run through these, and then see if anybody else has any they'd like to add to the list.
Sure. So some of this is kind of organized around people that we may be able to come and talk to us. And so let me give a very brief update on that first. I had hoped that through contacts that I have, that James has, that we would be able to get somebody from CISA, which is is this a critical infrastructure and security, or is it communications? And I don't remember what this C stands for anymore. It sort of grew out of, FBI used to have this group on critical infrastructure security. And so I tend to think of the CI as that, but I don't think it is.
It's a cybersecurity and infrastructure security agency. So they got security in their place.
Right. Okay. And they have a group that specializes in election security. So I had hoped that we could get somebody from there to talk to us this month. And so I worked some of my contacts, and I was about to give up, and finally I had sort of a positive response from somebody, but not soon enough to get somebody in for this month. So I may be able to get somebody next month. The other aspect, the number 2, is sort of best practices and other state models. And I have some contacts with that verified voting group that Ted mentioned. And I had a couple of negative responses there that were disconcerting, and then a couple of positive responses, actually. And so I may have to decide. One was from a policy person there that has sort of a good national level view, and the other one that was interested but was on vacation the first time I contacted him is probably I'll say one of the leading election security experts in the nation, who did a lot of work in a lot of the investigations after the 2020 election, and expert witness work in a variety of states. Now, he is a very technical person, and he tends to focus on the technical aspects, which may not be that level of in the weeds may not be the right thing for this group. But I'll follow up with both of those and see where they go. Somebody from CISA or somebody from verified voting. So national concerns and when I say national concerns, maybe I should have said national security concerns, because that's kind of what CISA looks at. And then best practices at the state level and state models is verified voting. There were some issues that came up that we haven't really talked about, as far as how our state or how our county officials trained. How do they know how to treat the equipment so that it's secure? How do they know how to respond to voters' concerns? That was one of the things that Ted just mentioned for accessibility. But do they know how to, if somebody thinks something's plugged into a network, do they know how to respond to that kind of training? Then audits. We did talk about audits as kind of a check and balance on counting accuracy and machines. And we haven't really gotten back to that. I know at one point, I think, Brad, was that you that said you knew some people that did audits? Was it this kind of audit, or is that something you think could pan out with a speaker?
I worked in the auditor's office, not quite the, not quite apples to apples for this particular field, but yeah, happy to. I'm trying to think if there's anybody that fitting that mold, as far as certainly not maybe in that office, but somewhere else, but not I don't have anybody on speed dial necessarily.
Yeah. Okay. I think part of the issue that comes up with election audits is it's a little bit different from financial audits, and that you're looking at, sort of a statistical sample, and somebody that can talk to how they manage those samples is good. And I think that's a pretty big difference.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they look at 3 precincts every election. I'm not sure how they pick them, and I don't know if it's a hand-eye recount or, you know, kind of what, if they just run the ballots through the machine again to see if it gets the same number. I'm not really sure what goes on in the audits, but I know they do. I think they pick 3 precincts at random.
Right. So I think understanding that better is something that our committee could work on. There is an additional.
Sorry, Steve, I can editorialize about that a little bit. I was very curious about the auditing portion. This new risk limiting audit approach has been adopted in a very small handful of states, but seems to be the direction that states are moving. North Carolina is not. I can't speak to how our current post-election audit works, but I can say that the risk limiting audit basically increases the sample size as a function of how close the election is. Now, again, how that differs from what we do, Mary Ellen, maybe you can fill in the very important blank there for us.
Sorry, Ted, but not quite. What I was getting ready to say is I don't know if the audits are standard throughout North Carolina, but I do have access to a Board of Elections member here, and I also know Charlie Collicott, and I would be glad to see what we do in Guilford County if it transfers. If it's just individual by county, I don't know that that would add anything much to our knowledge, but I could certainly find that out between now and next month as to exactly how we audit here.
I think that would be really helpful. I think
Okay.
when I talk about speakers and getting sort of national level speakers, I think we also need to have some people who have been on the ground in North Carolina and know how things really work here.
Well, I mean, I know one of our BOE members very well. And actually, Jennifer, she spoke. She was one of the speakers at Trusted Elections here last time. And she certainly could share information if we needed something like that. Because, I know her personally, and I was really very impressed with what she was able to say at that Trusted Election tour. I didn't know she had all of that knowledge, but anyway, it could be useful for us to know. I do think that post-audit process is something that people know very little about, and I do think it might help to allay some fears.
Yep. Good. There is a sort of a 5th topic that we've sort of gone back and forth on with this group. And so I wanted to hear what people had to say about that. And that's the list maintenance issue. It is in our group's title. It's ballot security, cybersecurity, and list maintenance. And one of the members had some questions about that after the Paul Cox presentation. Jennifer had mentioned there was another group that was also looking at those issues. So I don't know if we want to also focus on that at the risk of duplicating other effort, or sometimes duplicating other effort is a good thing. So what do people think about list maintenance and how lists are kept up to date and that sort of thing? And actually, I guess one of the things within the purview of this committee might be how the lists are protected from tampering with and cyber attack, because back in 2016 anyway, there was a concerted effort by a foreign government to tamper with some of those lists in about 20 states in the US. They did not succeed, but that is a target of attacks. So what do people think about that?
Steve or Jennifer, do we know the other group that is looking at list maintenance, kind of what their aspect of list maintenance focuses on?
Yes, and I think that you all are coming at it from 2 different directions, and so I think it is perfectly fine to have overlap. Maintaining the integrity of the list is definitely, something this committee could look at. The other committee is voter access and registration. And so they're looking at, how do voters access, voting? What are the obstacles? And obviously being purged from the list when you shouldn't be would be an obstacle to voting, unless you're notified. So they're looking at that aspect of list maintenance. Are voters notified when they're purged? What's the process? Do they have chance to, change their address or whatever? That's kind of the list maintenance they're looking at, which is different from what you would look at.
And Jennifer, I'm on that committee, and very honestly, I did miss one meeting by mistake. I forgot to attend. That was awful, but I forgot. But I can easily carry back and forth between the two committees what's going on, because that is the other committee that I serve on.
Yeah, it would seem that our aspect of securing the list as part of the overarching securing the election infrastructure from cyber threats seems to fit pretty well. I think if we stay with that angle, we don't necessarily double tap, but probably fits in really well with what the other group is doing.
And I will ask if I've missed something and make certain that I'm up to date. But definitely, I know, as Jennifer said, we would not be approaching it from that aspect at all. It's more accessibility and getting there and finding out you're no longer on the voter rolls, that sort of type of surprise. So yeah, that's easy to do.
Are there any topics that we missed that this group would like to get into?
I know on the agenda, you're about to talk about election equipment certifications for the security of the actual equipment. And Steve, when you talk about that, is that going to include kind of the physical, like locking the equipment up, that kind of security as well?
No, so it's mostly certification of what equipment is allowed. It's not operational aspects of how it's maintained. Part of that, in my mind, was going back to that, talking about training, and what county officials are told and what they do, I guess, as far as locking equipment up. I do know that I don't think that's ever actually caused a problem in an election anywhere in the US, but I do know of a particular county in another state where they did an audit, and the equipment was kept in an unlocked warehouse, basically with a broken back door, and that did not lead to a lot of confidence. So I'm just going to say that was in another state, and I will not name the other state. But that's the kind of thing that if we knew how do we have standards in North Carolina? How are they enforced? Are they audited? Are they, I mean, do state officials go around and see that counties are following the proper procedures? I don't know how that works.
Yeah, I think that would be a good topic to include. I thought when you were telling your story, you were going to say that a squirrel had gotten into the equipment.
There are no doubt stories like that too.
They get into everything.
Yeah. Any other topics?
Scott, you got any ideas since you've been in 4 states?
Oh, I have lots of ideas. You know what? I have a couple of comments, just ideas to put out there if for you guys to consider. Physical security of the equipment, as we we're just talking about, is probably one of the most important things to having secure equipment. The cyber threat that's posed to election equipment is based upon access, and the equipment generally and almost without exception is not connected to some external network. So nefarious actor can't get access electronically or remotely to the equipment. Someone who wanted to cause trouble or mischief it needs to have physical access to the equipment. And so locks and keys and doors and seals and checks and those are really the foundation of good cybersecurity. And it seems physical security doesn't seem as sexy or even relevant when it comes to cybersecurity, but it's really foundational. And at times we put too much emphasis on the internet kind of access, which is really not much of a vulnerability, and we overlook the physical controls and access controls that really guarantee the security of the equipment. So I would just put that out there for you to not overlook the importance of procedures and practices for physically keeping people away from the equipment and detecting if somebody did get access to the equipment and being able to identify and recover, take any corrective actions that you need if somebody does get unauthorized access. In terms of auditing, RLA, I know is the new sexy thing. Try to explain that to someone. It's an academic statistical exercise that has some value, but doesn't necessarily have more value than some of the eye hand count practices that are going on right now. One is a statistic, like polls are statistics, and election results are results. And we have elections because we don't want to rely on statistics. So by doing eye hand counts with randomly selected precincts, you can have some more other than statistical confidence that the results are correct. And I would also have you guys consider that logic and accuracy testing pre-election is also an essential part of the audit. It's a pre-election audit. Is your equipment actually counting things correctly and recognizing all the contests and attributing votes to the right candidates? I've seen jurisdictions who did not thoroughly test their equipment before the election and found out that their equipment, because of candidate rotation and some things particular to that state, was accruing votes to the wrong candidates. It's counting things correctly, but it's giving wrong candidates a vote on paper ballots. Let me be clear, that was on physical paper ballots. So that's something that should have been caught in pre-election testing. So as you look at auditing, don't focus exclusively, this is just my suggestion, don't focus exclusively on post-election, focus on pre-election as well. And I always used to revalidate all my pre-election testing post-election, just to make sure that nothing had changed from the time that I originally did the testing to afterwards. In terms of accessible equipment, some of the comments I would say that they're subject to the same security requirements as any other equipment, even though they do have different features that accommodate different needs. They all are certified to the same security requirements and have the same, they're not connected to the internet, just like the other equipment's not connected to the internet. Probably the biggest challenge I've seen with accessible equipment is nobody knows it's there and nobody knows who's it for. And it's not offered to people who might benefit from it. And the range of disabilities is broad and not always visible. So, for me, that's always something with accessible equipment that I think should always be taken a look at, is how accessible is the accessible equipment. So anyway, I hope you don't mind me just opining about some of the conversations that you guys have had. Just throw out some thoughts for you guys to consider and incorporate into what you're doing. I will say one last thing is verified voting is a good source of information, but they're not always an objective source. So make sure that you don't base any of your findings or recommendations on one source of information. And I might be able to help you to get someone from CISA or a cybersecurity expert or someone, an expert nationally for any of the things that you're considering, if that might be helpful. So please let me know if I may be of assistance.
That's great. Thanks a lot, Scott. We may call on you. Yeah, the logic and accuracy testing, that's the most visible failure of that, I think, was, and I'll name this one, was the Antrim County, Michigan instance in 2020, where they misconfigured the machines and they didn't notice it until after. Anyway, okay, good. Why don't we move on, if that's okay? So I put together sort of a brief presentation. I'm trying to, like, tamp down on my professor urges. I'm not going to give you a whole lecture and a class, but I'm going to go through some things that I discovered when I started looking at the laws as they relate to cybersecurity and the equipment that we use and equipment certification. And I'm going to try to tie some things together as far as what I think are the concerns I hear from the general public as far as what they're wary of with cybersecurity. Because a lot of that we take care of, and people just don't know that we take care of it. So let me see if I can get this. See. Does that show up all right?
Yeah.
That looks good to me.
All right. So I started, like I said, by going through some of the North Carolina code, and there's a section that talks all about equipment certification, what equipment can be used, and how it needs to be certified. And so this is sort of the starting point, and this is where a lot of interesting things to me are. And the first part is it delegates some authorization to the state Board of Elections, and it does some things explicitly in the code itself. So the very first thing that comes out is that any system has to be certified by the state Board of Elections in accordance with the procedures set forth by them. Now, what are those procedures? There's a document they have called the Election Certification Program. Elections, I think I'm missing a word. Maybe it's systems, Election System Certification Program. That document was surprisingly hard to find. And so I put a copy for this group in the Google Drive. There's a folder now for equipment certification. And these slides that I'm going through are there, and then that document is also there. So what do they say? That's what it is, Election System Certification Program. And that's available to all of you. So it describes 3 levels of testing that all equipment has to go through. There's federal compliance testing, state certification testing, and acceptance testing. The most rigorous of these is actually the federal compliance testing. And so I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. It's the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, the EAC, has guidelines that they have developed. There are multiple versions. And the state of North Carolina requires that all of our equipment be certified as to abiding by those standards. And then there's state certification testing. A lot of this relies on, for the actual capability testing and the security testing relies on the EAC testing. But it does specify things like, for example, documentation and other things that need to be left, put in escrow so that they're accessible to the state if there are any questions. And that includes the entire software source code, information about development processes. And they even require, North Carolina requires, a list of all the programmers responsible for creating the software. So if there was ever a question of who was responsible for this, you can always go check that. And then beyond that, there's a requirement that the vendor post a bond or a letter of credit to cover damages. I think it has to be at least $10 million or the cost of redoing an election. So they have to put something down for that. So when systems are certified, the state will check that the systems down to the version numbers of all the software, the specific versions of software that are included, have passed the federal compliance testing, and the state certifies that, and that they have all the documentation and the responsibility that they need from the vendors, and then they can certify it. When systems are delivered, there's an acceptance testing phase that makes sure that the actual delivered systems match the version numbers and everything of the software that was certified by the EAC. Okay, so the federal system is basically, they have what's called the voluntary voting system guidelines, VVSG, and they've gone through 3 versions in the past couple of decades. The first version was in 2005, and I'll say that this whole process came out of the Help America Vote Act in 2002, and so security is one component of that, but actually accessibility and ADA compliance, making sure everybody can vote, that's a very large part of this as well. So security is a piece of it, but only one piece. The last revision was pretty major, and I'm going to talk about a couple of things that were in the last revision to this. The version 2 revision was released in 2022. And 1 year after that, all certifications have to use version 2 or later. So as of November 15th, everything had to use version 2. The problem with that is that there are no systems that have been certified by version 2 of this as of yet. North Carolina recently certified a new system. When I say recently, within the past year, the last one that was certified in North Carolina was done on July the 6th. And believe it or not, that actually used the 2005 standards. That was version 1.0, which was allowed at the time. So a lot of things have changed in cybersecurity in the past, what would that be, 19 years? So it was due for an upgrade, and version 2 is an excellent upgrade. So when I have my cybersecurity hat on and I read through that, I think the version 2 standards are excellent, actually. I may even use that in some of my security classes as sort of an example of people that did things right. So I don't want to talk about everything that goes into it, and all the details are really not that interesting to this group. The systems are tested by organizations that are certified as voting system test labs, and there's a list on the EAC website of all the systems that have been certified, and there's a list on the North Carolina Board of Elections site of the equipment that's been certified in North Carolina. There's not a whole lot in North Carolina. It seems like there's only about 6 or 7 systems on there. And most counties use the same systems. One interesting thing about the EAC website, if you go onto their voting systems, you can actually pull up a map of each state, and it'll mark which counties in which states use what equipment. And so you can actually see what we use in North Carolina, for example. So when I read through this, and I'll say I read all of the North Carolina procedures document. That was maybe 70 pages. This VVSG version 2 is 350 pages long. I skimmed it and looked at the parts that I thought were most interesting. But I also looked at it with in mind what I thought people were skeptical about when it comes to the systems that they use to vote. And so there were two things in particular that I wanted to mention, because I think these are the two most important improvements with the version 2. And the first is that it specifically talks about what we call in security, we call software independence. This requires that the voting system provide proof that ballots have been recorded accurately and compliant with the paper-based system architecture. Forget the or part for now. So this is what requires us, for example, to have a ballot that goes into each voter's hand, whether it's marked by a touchscreen device that prints something out, or whether they, hand mark with a pen. The voter has something in their hands that's a piece of paper that gets put into a locked box somewhere, so that we can do things to verify that the votes were counted. The tabulators, for example, counted all the votes. And so the requirement here is that an error or fault in the voting system software or hardware cannot cause an undetectable change in election results. So that was a pretty major change. That was not required previously. The term software independence actually postdates the 2005, the original version of these guidelines. So we're sort of catching up with that, which is good. But one thing I'll point out is North Carolina already required this. So another piece from the North Carolina Code is the requirement that with respect to electronic voting systems, they must generate a paper ballot for each individual vote cast, and the paper ballot shall be maintained in a secure fashion and shall serve as a backup record for purposes of any hand-to-eye count, hand-to-eye recount, or other audit. So we have to do that by law. And I do make a distinction between the things that we in North Carolina are required to do by law, specifically because it's in the code, versus things that are in the procedure document that the State Board of Elections produced. Those are easy to change. This is not. And so this is a pretty hard and fast requirement. And I think this is one thing that, when people cast their votes, I think they understand they're putting in a piece of paper, but I don't think they appreciate that that happens in every single polling site for every person that casts a vote. And so that's a great way to have confidence that things are done correctly. The second thing that actually came up earlier is that starting with version 2.0 of these standards, it says that it does not permit devices or components using external network connections to be part of the voting system. Now, there's some caveats to that. What this really means is the devices, if they use a device that the voters use, cannot be connected to a network. Tabulators end up reporting votes centrally. I don't think it is against the rules for those systems to be connected to a network, although typically they're not. Typically, there's a separate step that the poll workers use to report from that site. But certainly any device that the voter uses to cast a ballot cannot be connected to any kind of external network. And again, I'll point out that North Carolina was ahead of the curve on this one. 2017 a law was passed. This is in the code now, as no voting system used in any election in this state shall be connected to a network, or any feature allowing connection to a network shall be disabled. Prohibiting network connections include the internet, fax, telephone line networks established via modem, or any other wired or wireless connection. So by that law, if the state certification is working correctly, they should not certify any equipment for use in elections that include, Jennifer mentioned somebody opening up a machine to make sure it didn't have a modem. But if the state's doing its job right in certification, that wouldn't be an issue. So I think this is something else that people have some misconceptions about, and understanding that that's in the law. And in fact, I think it's worth noting that North Carolina was a little ahead of the federal standards on this. I think that gives a lot of trust in what we do. So those are the two big things. Final observations is that since the only new equipment has to be certified at the federal level by version 2 now, which is a very good standard, very strong, that new systems, and I think the state, we could still adopt systems that were previously certified by the EAC to the older standards. I don't think that would violate state rules, but I think we should, I would advocate anyway for using the newer certification standards, at least once we have equipment that's certified by those standards. The other thing that I noticed looking at how this was put into practice is that North Carolina does seem to delegate a lot of the technical review to the system testing labs in the federal level. And the reason for that is just reality. Thorough testing is very expensive. Ideally, and this is not required at any level, it should include penetration testing, people trying to break the systems. There was actually federal legislation proposed in 2 different sessions of Congress, bipartisan. It was Mark Warner in Virginia and Susan Collins in Maine. It hasn't gone anywhere. I'm not sure how serious they are about that legislation, but it actually would require that the federal certification include penetration testing. So another suggestion I would consider thinking about is that if this is too expensive for states to do, and it may be that maybe states can form coalitions to do testing of equipment. There's not that much election equipment proposed, so I think coalitions could do a better job of testing. You just have to trust other states, which sometimes we're not great at. So the last question I have is simply, I picked 2 things that I thought were common misconceptions: the network connectivity and the paper ballots, and saw that those were actually addressed in the law and in the way we do things. I don't know if people hear other things from people talking about concerns that people have that we should investigate and see if those are really concerns or not. But that's what I had, and I'll leave it there.
Stephen, can I ask, when you talk about systems testing, what's the scope of that? So software, obviously, the polling device itself. What other equipment falls under the purview of that systems testing?
So it includes everything to run an election, other than like the voter registration list, the poll books. Well, actually, poll books are included. The poll books that are used at the precincts. But the interface of that to kind of the statewide database, and there's an acronym for that in North Carolina that I can't remember off the top of my head. But that interface, the back end system is not considered for part of that. The other thing, actually, there is one other system that's exempt from these rules, and that is we have some ways that people can cast ballots electronically, like online, and there is not a paper version of that. That's typically just used for example, overseas military and people like that. There was a court case in North Carolina that I know about that said that the ADA needs of people doing absentee ballots were not met. And one of the ways that North Carolina decided to meet those was to give some people in the state of North Carolina access to that system, which was only used overseas before that. Those are exempt from these requirements, but the idea is that they're used very seldom.
I just got a note from Rachel that she's got to end this meeting. She thought she could make me the host, but she has to end this meeting to start her other meeting, which is at 5 o'clock.
Oh, okay. Oh, sorry about that, Rachel. All right. Jennifer's doing a trusted election tour. Everybody find out about it. That was the only
Yeah.
thing left on the agenda.
We'll get you more information on that shortly, and look to see everybody at the meeting in April. Maybe we'll have some good speakers.
Okay.
One last
Right.
thing, but it's till we get cut off. I'm gonna keep going till we get cut off. The one more thing about list maintenance that we might cover is ERIC. And that's the state connecting to other states to make sure that people aren't voting in 2 or 3 states. And how are we doing that? How were we doing it? How are we doing it? What's the best practice for that?
Right. And that was actually what was in my mind when I said a coalition about testing equipment, and sometimes states don't trust other states. That was actually what I was thinking about.
All right. Oh, so I guess I have to sign us off because she
All
can't get
right.
on.
Thanks,
Okay.
everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care,
Bye.
guys.
Thank Ted's daughter.
Yeah, cutie.